The decade between 2000 and 2009 was a particularly fruitful era for the horror genre, with some of the greatest horror movies hitting the big screens and some flying under the radar. House of the Devil. After his incredible fall from grace with Cabin Fever 2, which he went on to disown, Ty West became an instant genre director to watch following his 2009 masterpiece, House of the Devil, which starred Greta Gerwig. That's right, Greta Gerwig, aka the director of Little Women. This horror film concerns a young college student who was hired as a babysitter at an isolated house and is soon caught up in a bizarre and dangerous event as she fights for her life. The film combines elements of both the slasher film and haunted house subgenres while using the satanic panic of the 1980s as a central plot element. House of the Devil is a delightfully old-fashioned tale of Satanism that remains one of the best things to come out of the vintage-tinged horror throwback. Now, eager for a sum of cash that could turn her life around, our protagonist Sam ignores all the red flags along the way until it is far too late and House of the Devil delivers maximum impact. It's a slow burn, that's for sure, but simultaneously creepy and beautiful. The film received hugely positive reviews, with Rotten Tomatoes gifting it an 87% with the general consensus reading. Though its underlying themes are familiar, House of the Devil effectively sheds the loud and gory cliches of contemporary horror to deliver a tense, slow-building throwback to the fright flicks of decades past. The movie suffocates you with its smoldering atmospheric dread and shocking moments of blunt violence. It is a must-watch. Coming in at number 4, one of my personal favourites, Trick or Treat. Michael Dougherty's Trick or Treat is perhaps the finest ode to Halloween ever created, and that's saying something. Released in 2007, this anthology film relates 4 Halloween horror stories with a common element in them. Sam, a mysterious child trick-or-treater wearing shabby orange footy pajamas with a burlap sack over his head. He is absolutely terrifying, trust me. The character in turn makes an appearance in each of the stories whenever a character breaks Halloween tradition. In this chilling horror, the residents of a small town are not quite what they seem. The local principal is a child-murdering sociopath, and the newborn virgin a wolf in sheep's clothing. Now, what makes this movie so effective is Michael Dougherty's obvious love and respect for the horror genre, tradition, holiday lore, and superstition. Without naming any names or dragging any previous horrors about Halloween, Trick or Treat is quite simply the quintessential Halloween film. Now, the film currently holds an approval rating of 84% on Rotten Tomatoes, with the general consensus reading a deftly crafted tribute to Halloween legends. Trick or Treat hits all the genre marks with gusto and old-fashioned suspense. Honestly, if you want to gear up for Halloween 2020, considering we're all in quarantine, we don't have anything else to do, I suggest you check out this holiday classic now. Coming in at number 3, I've said it once, I've said it again, Session 9 is one of the greatest films. Brad Anderson blessed the horror genre with a small tale of encroaching madness that is absolutely haunting to behold. This 2001 psychological horror stars David Caruso, Peter Mullen, and Josh Lucas, and follows an asbestos abatement crew who begin to experience growing tensions while working in an abandoned mental asylum. This is paralleled by the gradual revelation of a former patient's disturbed past through recorded audio tapes of her regression sessions. Now, it should be said that there is really not much that is inherently terrifying about this film. There are no real jump scares, no blood or gore, and the pace is slow and action low. That rhymed. However, this slow burn has a way of creeping up on you, as the boundaries of sanity are blurred within the confines of an abandoned mental asylum. As the horror begins to unfold, a Lovecraftian descent into madness sweeps through the asylum, affecting every single crew member as they turn on each other, vanish, and reappear in this truly creepy narrative. Session 9 received mixed reviews, with the film currently holding a 63 approval rating, which is incredibly undeserving. It should be way higher. Bloody Disgusting ranked the film 5th in its list of 20 best horror films of the 2000s, writing, Session 9 isn't just a cheap hack and slash, instantly forgettable type horror film, but a psychologically probing, deeply unsettling journey off the edge and into the abyss of the human mind. Honestly, I can't stress enough how frightening this movie is, not to mention its chilling conclusion. Please check it out. Next up at number 2, we have Eden Lake. If this list has taught us anything thus far, it's that the 2000s were filled to the brim with some of the greatest underrated horror movies of our time. Eden Lake was one of the greatest. Released in 2008, this British horror stars Kelly Riley and Michael Fassbender, as well as a very young Jack O'Connell. The plot concerns Jenny, a teacher, and her boyfriend Steve, who head to a lake to spend a peaceful weekend. However, a group of undisciplined teenagers irk them with their continuous pranks, ruining their weekend. And it is far more than childish pranks, with the weekend becoming a fight to survive for everyone involved. Now, the film itself is among a group of roughly contemporaneous films that deal with concerns over broken Britain and fears of hoodies. Now, for those not from the UK, broken Britain refers to a perceived widespread state of social decay in the UK, with hoodies being at the forefront and also referred to as chavs, lawless individuals who have no respect for society. But back to the film. After the couple confront the gang of unruly teens, their weekend descends into madness, as conversation escalates with the teens quickly revealing themselves to be a sadistic force of violence. We hate to see it. Thankfully, the movie cleverly avoids the classist bent that threatens at every turn, instead focusing on the pressures and dangers of groupthink. Eden Lake was met with mostly positive reviews, with Rotten Tomatoes giving it 79%, with the general consensus reading a brutal and effective British hoodie horror that, despite the cliches, stays on the right side of scary. The movie, particularly if you're from Britain, is a truly harrowing experience, with many having their own stories of hooded thugs. It is a chilling experience that will linger in the pit of your stomach for days, even months. And last on our list, we have Triangle. From writer-director Christopher Smith, who put a delightfully cheeky spin on the backward slasher genre with Severance, he got even more creative with the 2009 movie Triangle. This psychological horror stars Melissa George and a young Liam Hemsworth, and centers on George's character, who portrays a single mother who goes on a boating trip with several friends. However, when they are forced to abandon their ship in the middle of the Bermuda Triangle, they board a derelict ocean liner where they become convinced that someone is stalking them. Now, George's character Jess is a woman with an undisclosed source of agony behind her surface level calm, with plenty being revealed throughout the duration of the movie. Now, it's tough to even discuss the film without giving away its twists and turns, which are superbly executed throughout. However, what I can say is that a vicious time loop thrusts the group into a nightmare scenario, with Jess emerging at a pivotal time that may be the key to their escape. Now, overlapping timelines is incredibly difficult to execute. However, Christopher Smith does this with grace, displaying the horrors of being trapped in one hellish loop. The film was received well by critics and viewers alike, with the movie garnering an approval rating of 80%, with the general consensus reading, Triangle sails into some strange waters, but this intelligent, well-acted horror outing anchors its idiosyncrasies in a satisfying, scary story. Honestly, this film has stayed with me for many years, with it being one horror that isn't easy to forget, for many reasons. Particular scenes linger in the mind, however, it's its unique delivery that will make you want to return time and time again. Coming in at number 5, we have The Woman, 2011. The Woman is a story about the depth of human depravity, and it will truly linger with you for years to come. Now, this is a 2011 horror film directed by Lucky McKee, adapted by McKee and Jack Ketchum from Ketchum's novel of the same name. It is also a sequel to the 2009 film Offspring. The plot concerns a lawyer who puts his family in jeopardy when he captures the last member of a violent clan and tries to forcibly tame her. The woman's presence unleashes the barbariousness in the family, and her capabilities pale in comparison to the horrors of the lawyer and his son. The heinous acts ultimately lead to a massacre of the final act, with some moments that will leave you groaning in disgust and feeling physically sick. However, saying that, the movie is a clever inversion of the genre tropes, with the movie wearing its gender politics proudly. Critical reception for The Woman has been hugely positive, with it currently holding a rating of 71% on Rotten Tomatoes, with the general consensus reading strange, audacious, and aggressive. The Woman is an uneven horror flick that games viewers with a wildly bloody finale. Coming in at number 4, Tigers Are Not Afraid. Now, this film was hyped a lot, but I can safely assure you that the hype is warranted. The movie wowed festival goers for years, and this movie truly deserves all the praise it receives. Tigers Are Not Afraid is a 2017 Mexican crime fantasy film written and directed by Isa Lopez, set on the streets of a Mexico ravaged by the human trafficking ring known as the Huascas. The plot follows two orphans, Estrella and Shine, on the run from the cartel that murdered their parents. However, the film takes a turn when Estrella appears to possess 3 magic wishes, which arrive with bloody results. The movie is as beautiful as it is terrifying, with the same kind of magic which existed in Guillermo del Toro's movies, such as Pan's Labyrinth. Del Toro was also a huge fan of the movie, with him calling Tigers Are Not Afraid an unsparing blend of fantasy and brutality, innocence and evil, innovative, compassionate, and mesmerizing. The movie was highly praised by critics, with the film holding a 97% on Rotten Tomatoes, with the consensus reading, Tigers Are Not Afraid draws on childhood trauma for a story that deftly blends magical fantasy and hard-hitting realism and leaves a lingering impact. Coming in at number 3, Backcountry 2015. The only way to describe Backcountry is an utter anxiety attack from start to finish, and this is by far one of the greatest compliments you can give this movie because it is utterly terrifying and so effective in delivering thrills and frights. This Canadian nature survival horror was written and directed by Adam McDonald and is loosely based on the true story of a man-eating bear and 30-year-olds Mark Jordan and Jacqueline Perry in the backcountry of Missinaibi Lake Provincial Park north of Chapleau, Ontario in 2005, events for which Mark later received the Star of Courage Award for. Now the plot concerns Alex and Jen, who have left the city to go camping in the country. After settling in the woods, they realize they've forgotten their phones and they become lost. Classic. Their trip then turns into a fight for survival when they are stalked by a man-eating bear. The tension from start to finish is palpable, from the conflict between the couple as they become lost, to them being relentlessly pursued by a grizzly bear. The drama is rich and the dialogue slow and steady. Throughout, you can't help but feel a sense of fear and nausea as you watch the movie from the comfort of your home. The movie was a huge success, with Backcountry currently holding an approval rating of 92% on Rotten Tomatoes, with the general consensus reading tense, well acted, and at once atmospheric as well as brutally impactful. Backcountry marks a memorably assured debut from writer-director Adam McDonald. Also, we all need to watch more Canadian cinema. Coming in at number 2, Under the Skin 2014. Under the Skin is a film that has lingered with me since the moment I watched it. There's something incredibly unnerving and uncanny about it. You can never quite relax or feel settled while watching, and that's why this ScarJo movie is so effective. Under the Skin was directed by Jonathan Glazer, who prior to this had directed 2 features, Sexy Beast and Birth, with Under the Skin displaying his true knowledge of horror. The film is loosely based on the 2000 novel by Michael Faber, and as I previously mentioned, stars ScarJo as an otherworldly woman who preys on men in Scotland. Glazer developed Under the Skin for over a decade. He and screenwriter Walter Campbell parted back from an elaborate special effects heavy concept to a sparse story focusing on an alien perspective of the human world. Now, a fun fact for you movie buffs out there, most characters were played by non-actors, and many scenes were filmed with hidden cameras, including the scenes where Scarlett Johansson lures men into her van. If you know, you know. Throughout this movie, ScarJo meets and seduces men for reasons unknown, before taking them back to a black room where they are forced to wade into a pool of liquid, seemingly oil, which ultimately sucks them down, leaving behind floating sacks of skin. The movie essentially uses sci-fi to tell a horror story about gender dynamics, and as I said before, viewing Under the Skin is a peculiar experience, with myself in particular feeling an uncomfortable sense of existential dread and horror throughout the duration of the movie. It's oblique, repetitive, and slow. It's bleak in ways that I can't explain, the acting, the lack of colour grade, the dreary Scottish weather. Every single aspect of it is intentional and effective, and once viewed you can't seem to shake it off. And finally, coming in at number 1, we have The Transfiguration 2017. It is incredibly difficult to make a quality vampire movie, especially one that is not cheesy. Twilight. However, there has been a few hidden gems in the horror genre, from movies such as Let the Right One In, to The Lost Boys, to 30 Days of Night, and now The Transfiguration. The Transfiguration is a 2017 horror drama written and directed by Michael O'Shea and follows troubled teen Milo, who hides behind his fascination with vampire lore. When he meets the equally alienated Sophie, the two form a bond that begins to challenge Milo's dark obsession, blurring his fantasy into reality. As they become better friends, Sophie quickly learns that Milo truly believes he is a vampire. The film is refreshing in its choice of protagonist, as well as its use of vampirisms as a coping mechanism for rejection and isolation. The film was a hit among critics and horror lovers alike, with The Transfiguration holding an approval rating of 85%, with the consensus reading. The Transfiguration tells a quieter, more deliberately paced tale than the genre fans might expect, but for those with the patience to let it sink in, it offers its own rewards, and I couldn't agree more. It is definitely worth your time. Coming in at number 5, we have The Invitation 2015. The Invitation is a 2015 horror thriller film directed by Karen Kusama and stars Logan Marshall Green, Tammy Blanchard, and Michael Huisman from The Haunting of Hill House. Responding to an invitation from his ex-wife, a man brings his girlfriend to a dinner party. There, he relives the trauma of their child's death and becomes suspicious that his ex-wife has ulterior motives for inviting him. The Invitation is an insidiously subtle nightmare in which you are constantly going back and forth in your head. Is there something wrong at this party, or is there something wrong with me? The movie manages to torture our minds from start to finish with its constant sense of unease and uncomfortable social interactions. The Invitation holds an 88% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes, with the critical consensus reading, The Invitation makes brilliant use of its tension-rich premise to deliver a uniquely effective and surprisingly clever, slow-building thriller. Ultimately, at the end of the day, if you get invited to a dinner party, just say no. Lucky for us, we're all self-isolating. Social distance. Coming in at number 4, we have Attack the Block, 2011. Attack the Block is a 2011 British science fiction horror comedy film written and directed by Joe Cornish and starring John Boyega, Jodie Whittaker and Nick Frost. The film centers on a teenage street gang who have to defend themselves from predatory alien invaders on a council estate in South London on Guy Fawkes Night. Attack the Block is an effective genre mashup that blends sci-fi and comedy with creature feature horror, with the movie offering up immense tension as well as tons of laughs and engaging social commentary. Attack the Block received critical acclaim from critics, with it receiving a 90% on Rotten Tomatoes, with the consensus reading, effortlessly mixing scares, laughs, and social commentary. Attack the Block is a thrilling, brisky-paced sci-fi yarn with a distinctly British flavour. Attack the Block is a movie that has something for everyone. It is also the place Star Wars star John Boyega got his start, making it a movie you should definitely take a look at. Attack the Block was revisited by critics following the casting of its 2 lead actors as stars of flagship science fiction franchises. As I mentioned, Boyega in Star Wars and Whittaker in Doctor Who. In a 2017 retrospective, Tom Phillips, writing for GQ, described the film as, I quote, "one of the most confidently delivered debut feature films in recent memory. It still stands out as one of the best genre mashup films of the decade. It is definitely worth your time." Coming in at number 3, we have Maniac, 2013. Maniac is a 2013 slasher film directed by Frank Calhoun and starring Elijah Wood and Noor Aunizada. It is a remake of the 1980 film of the same name and follows the violent exploits of a brutal serial killer. The movie is completely faithful to William Lustig's controversial film, while simultaneously doubling down on violence and delivering a pulverizing slasher. Maniac is a solid revival of a genre that was beginning to feel rather stale. Not to mention, with its throwback synthesizer score and shadowy lighting, the entire movie evokes a sense of dread from start to finish. Now, the movie polarized critics, with it receiving a 53% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes, with the consensus reading, "shocking and bloody. Maniac is smarter than your average psychological slasher, but it's often undermined by its excessive gore." Now, some audience members had quite the visceral reaction when viewing the movie for the first time. Calhoun said that audience members have vomited and even fainted, and he took the reaction as a compliment, explaining, "We had a screening here in Los Angeles and somebody passed out, which I pat myself on the back for. The movie had to creep on you. It's a different kind of fear. It's more of a nauseating fear. You really have the opportunity to maybe feel the nausea of committing crime rather than glorifying it just for the aspect of fun and thrill. The audience gets to experience for the first time how sick it is to commit a murder. We're certainly not condoning it, but making a real statement about serial killers." Coming in at number 2, we have What We Do in the Shadows, 2015. What We Do in the Shadows is a 2015 New Zealand mockumentary horror comedy film written and directed by Jermaine Clement and Taika Waititi, and the first installment in the What We Do in the Shadows franchise. The film's plot concerns several vampires who live together in a flat in Wellington. Now, modern spoofs that are genuinely good are pretty hard to come by, with most of them flopping and flopping hard. However, What We Do in the Shadows is a comedy and horror masterpiece. The movie itself is a docu-style story of idiotic vampires. What's better than that? Yes. I did say it was a modern spoof film, however it doesn't overtly reference any specific horror movies, but instead makes jokes of all the tropes and cliches in classic vampire horror movies. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film holds an approval rating of 96%, with the general consensus reading, "smarter, fresher and funnier than a modern vampire movie has any right to be. What We Do in the Shadows is bloody good fun." Ultimately, what makes What We Do in the Shadows so great is that it was made for us, horror fans, and it isn't pandering to anyone else. Not to mention, it gets better and better the more times you watch it. Not to mention, Taika Waititi. It was essentially what gave him his big break. He's now doing Marvel, and he also did Jojo Rabbit, which, if you haven't seen Jojo Rabbit, I suggest you watch Jojo Rabbit. Should I say it one more time? Jojo Rabbit. And finally, coming in at number 1, we have The Witch, 2016. The Witch is a 2016 supernatural horror film written and directed by Robert Eggers in his feature directorial debut. The film stars Anya Taylor-Joy, Ralph Ineson, Kate Dickie, and Lucas Dawson. The plot follows a Puritan family who encounter forces of evil in the woods beyond their New England farm. The Witch is an incredibly effective movie that manages to make twin children and a billy goat some of the most terrifying villains of the movie. Wouldst thou like to live deliciously? The Witch relies on unsettling fear to instill dread, rather than relying on jump scares or overt scare tactics. The movie is a slow burn, however, from start to finish you're hooked and can't pull your eyes away from the screen. The film was a critical success, with it receiving an approval rating of 90% on Rotten Tomatoes, with the general consensus reading, as thought-provoking as it is visually compelling. The Witch delivers a deeply unsettling exercise in slow-building horror that suggests great things for debuting writer-director Robert Eggers. Between Anya Taylor-Joy's mesmerizing performance, my friend Daniel as the devil himself, shout out Daniel, and the ominous entity in the woods, I'm seeking out Black Phillip's book to sign right about now. Now it is safe to say that The Witch is a love it or hate it kind of movie, considering its pace and lack of overt scares. However, Leslie Coffin criticized A24 for this, saying that it was a huge mistake to market the movie as a terrifying horror, not because it doesn't fit into the genre of horror, but because of the power of expectations. The less you know about the movie, the better your experience will be, but everyone who saw it opening weekend probably walked in with too much knowledge and hype to really get as much out of it as they could have if the film had the veil of mystery. I honestly couldn't have said it better myself. First time I watched The Witch, I knew nothing at all about it, and I loved every single minute of it. But I also understand that a slow burn with not many jump scares isn't for everyone. Most people look for quick pace with horror, but The Witch will never offer that to you. But that's what makes it so effective. It's slow, it's eerie, there's not a lot of dialogue. That is what makes it so creepy. What exactly is in the woods? And why is this billy goat, Black Phillip, so terrifying? And, more importantly, why is he talking? And now, why is he a man?
Kicking off at number 5, Cherry Falls 2000. And you know what? I'm actually pretty damn shocked that I haven't covered this movie on Top 5 Scary Videos yet, and so it seems it has so far managed to give even me the slip, but no longer, because Cherry Falls is an awesome movie. Bizarrely enough though, this movie also very nearly didn't make it out of the cutting room floor. And you also know what? I'm super sad, because Brittany Murphy stars as the leading role of this movie, and she was such a phenomenal actor that was taken far too soon. Really, don't say a word, girl interrupted. Brittany Murphy was a force to be reckoned with in cinema, and she had so much more to offer. So if for any reason, watch this movie to see Murphy do what she did best. And also, Cherry Falls is just a straight up awesome movie, despite the fact it very nearly didn't even get released. Written by Ken Selden and directed by Australian filmmaker Jeffrey Wright, Cherry Falls is a slasher movie that surprisingly has some intelligently morbid undertones to it. I remember watching it on a whim after finding it in the DVD graveyard of HMV way back as a wee whippersnapper, and after finishing this movie thinking, damn, this is going to be a cult classic or something. That was great. And yeah, after that, nothing, really, go figure. But whatever, now is the time for Cherry Falls to rise up. It tells the tale of a local teenager and daughter of the town sheriff, Jodie Markin, played by Murphy, who alongside the local high school drama slog find themselves wrapped up in the classic virgins die first kind of slasher fest. However, whilst on the surface this movie seems like a box of cliche frogs, it certainly is not that, and it may actually well be one of the most creative and subversive slasher horror movies of the early 2000s. And there you go. Another reason to give it a watch. Swinging in at number 4, From Beyond the Grave, 1974. In the previous part of this series, we spoke about a particularly awesome horror film from the 70s, Symptoms, starring Angela Pleasance, that just so happened to take the number 1 spot in our series. Whilst her father, Donald Pleasance, is a legend of horror cinema himself, why settle for one Pleasance when you can have two? As thankfully for us, the two of them just so happen to feature in this horror anthology of British cinema. Now, whilst both of them take minor roles in this anthology piece, as do many of the other British horror names throughout this movie, and the whole thing is underpinned by the brilliant Peter Cushing, aka Grand Moff Tarkin from Star Wars, may I add, who in this regard plays an equally evil proprietor. And yeah, that was a Death Star reference. Well, me trying to make a Death Star reference, but hey, I'm clutching at straws here. You see, the anthology narrative behind this movie is intertwined find by an antique shop known as Temptations Limited, who peddle their wares under the banner offers you cannot resist. Quick note, you probably should resist them because nothing good ever comes from purchasing an ancient cursed item. Trust me. During the course of this movie, 4 items are sold that culminate in 4 differing stories. A mirror, a medal, a snuff box, and an antique door. And that's all you need to know really. Because as so far as anthology horror is concerned, although in some senses they're sometimes difficult to vibe with compared to a fully fledged horror narrative, in this sense, From Beyond the Grave is actually one of the most accessible horror anthologies going. It's intelligently crafted, every scene is paced with some remarkably capable performances, and you can tell that every frame was made with a reverence for the genre of horror. Classic horror. Written by Raymond Christodoulou and Robin Clark and directed by Kevin Connor, From Beyond the Grave should be welcome in any horror fan's repertoire. Give it a watch. Seriously, you'll be surprised. Next up at number 3, Fallen, 1998.
Come here. Come here.
Hey, what can I say? It's about time that we featured some Denzel Washington over here at Top 5 Scary Videos, as well as the late, great, legendary titan of cinema, James Gandolfini, in perhaps one of his most off-the-wall supporting minor roles. And by off-the-wall, I mean possessed by a demon for a few scenes, and then that's about it really. Go and chill in the green room. You know what? That is what I loved about Gandolfini though. He wasn't afraid about taking roles that he just liked the look of. Also, he got to sport a dope-ass mustache, so there's that too. Strangely enough though, on that theme, and for what it's worth, 1998's Fallen certainly doesn't get the credit that it deserves, and I'm not exactly sure why. Hey, I'm not saying that Fallen should be held up as some genre-defining moment in cinema, I'm just saying that it was a surprisingly exceptional movie, and it had an absolutely stacked cast to boot. Maybe I'm just nostalgic, but I miss the time where big budget movies were willing to take risks and make movies about supernatural detective thrillers. If anything, appreciating the nostalgia of a time where cinema still took that risk is worth it alone. Written by Nicholas Kazan and directed by Gregory Hoblit, Fallen tells a tale of a Philadelphia police detective, John Hobbs, played by Washington, who visits a serial killer that he was responsible for capturing, a man named Edgar Reese, played by Edgar Cotillas. Just as Reese is about to be executed on death row though, he grabs Hobbs' hand and speaks to him in ancient Aramaic. As he is executed, he laughs and sings "Time is on my side" by the Rolling Stones, and then several days later, a string of murder cases emerge, ones that are eerily similar to Edgar Reese's modus operandi. Initially believing it to be a copycat killer, Fallen quickly takes a turn into the realm of the supernatural, akin to the likes of The Exorcist 3, yet in this regard, it fully fleshes out the whole demonic serial killer possession thing out with a far more frightening scope. We'll say no more, and although this movie requires a bit of a suspension of disbelief to be fully enjoyed as a horror thriller, most importantly, this movie is just really bloody entertaining. Plus the cast is stacked. Denzel, John freaking Goodman, Donald Sutherland, Embeth Davis, Elias Koteas, and the late great James Gandolfini. Yeah, give this one a watch. Coming in at number 2, Just Before Dawn, 1981. Alright, we're heating things up a bit here because the remaining 2 entries of this list are absolutely worth your while. In fact, I would go so far as to say that they're some of the greatest forgotten horror movies that we've ever featured on this series. So yeah, it took some digging, but take note. The first of them is 1981's Just Before Dawn, potentially one of the most overlooked teen slashers in the whole of horror cinema. In fact, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that 1981's Just Before Dawn is the best slasher horror that you've never heard of. And yes, whilst there are certain visual themes in this movie that won't be for everyone, and everything from the score to the set design is a little dated, the actual craftsmanship behind this independent production is exactly what slasher horror cinema should be. Really, this film was made with some love and affection, and a real appreciation for just exactly why the vital ingredients of teen slashers have stood the test of time. Written and directed by Jeff Lieberman, the man responsible for 1978's Blue Sunshine, Just Before Dawn tells a tale of a group of 5 college kids, Warren, Constance, Jonathan, Megan, and Daniel, who after inheriting a remote rural property in the mountains, head out for a trip in classic teen slasher fashion. The thing is though, instead of just one serial killer out to get them in the dead of night, there's a whole family of them. Just Before Dawn is Friday the 13th meets Deliverance with a spattering of The Hills Have Eyes. And whilst that may sound like a hodgepodge of epic proportions that is doomed to fail, in actual fact, That's exactly why it's so good. The thing is, this movie can be really difficult to get a hold of, down to the fact that even during its original release it had already faded into obscurity. If you can manage to get your hands on it, however, you're certainly in for a treat. Surprisingly, for an unknown cast, Just Before Dawn is incredibly well acted, particularly by the backwoods individuals, shall we say. Certainly give this one a watch. And finally, coming in at number 1 spot, Long Weekend, 1978. And the final slot on this list is reserved for a movie that is so overlooked, it's almost criminal. You see, I have long championed that awesome and mysterious place known only as Australia, and when it comes to cinema, they have quietly yet consistently pumped out some of the most precious hidden gems known to horror. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but Australian horror cinema seems to strike a fine balance between the fear of the physical, the natural world, and the man-made world. Perhaps better than any other, 1978's Long Weekend exemplifies that theme entirely. And it doesn't just exemplify it, but it takes it and it runs with it, and it just keeps on going. Really, you might watch this film and think that it possibly couldn't take it any further. Spoilers, it does. Oh boy, does it keep going. Directed by Colin Eggleston, an Ozploitation director who has certainly earned his fair share of salt, but the real genius behind this movie is the name attached to the script. Everett de Roche, one of the most legendary scriptwriters ever to have cut his teeth in Australian cinema, despite being an American. The premise of this movie is simple enough. It concerns a couple, Peter, played by John Hargreaves, and Marcia, played by Bryony Behet, who alongside their trusty dog, head to the outback on a weekend camping trip. And that's it really. The thing is though, the couple in question have their own share of inner demons, and outwardly their marriage is on the rocks. Quickly the couple demonstrate an incredible lack of respect for Mother Nature, especially the husband Peter. They pollute the bush, they kill a dugong out in the water, they throw lit cigarettes in a dry bush, and they spray insecticide around their camp. How dare they? And as tensions between the couple escalate to a fever pitch, nature is certainly not pleased with their disrespectful ways. First, an eagle attacks them, then a possum, and then, wow, then things get really bad. Give this movie a watch, and don't let it be forgotten. Kicking off at number 5, The Resurrected, 1991.
It was uncanny. It could have been a portrait of Charles himself.
What do you mean?
I mean, Kerwin looked exactly like Charles.
And what better way to celebrate part 10 of this series other than to highlight a forgotten gem from our other favourite facet of horror fiction, Howard Phillips Lovecraft. The truth is, I'm gonna level with you guys. Creative Commons and the statute of limitations of H.P. Lovecraft's works have not exactly been kind to the true mastery of some of his finer works, and because of that, since the late 70s through to pretty much now, some of the more prolific cinematic adaptations of Lovecraft's stories haven't exactly been great. Granted, I'm not including the works of Stuart Gordon or Brian Yuzna on that point, but it remains the same. Quality and Lovecraft adaptation don't exactly go hand in hand. However, there is one independent movie that quickly sank into the swamps of forgotten horror, and if you can get your hands on this movie, The Resurrected is certainly worth a look at. And also, I should probably preface this with the fact that The Resurrected is kind of difficult to acquire, although I'm pretty sure Scream Factory and a few other outlets have purchase options, so yeah, PSA declared. If you can get it, please get it. And also, it's probably important that we highlight the fact that Dan O'Bannon, as in the writer behind Alien, Total Recall, and many other awesome movies, was the director behind this movie in his second ever attempt at a feature film, his first being The Return of the Living Dead. Yeah, exactly. Dan O'Bannon is reason enough to check this movie out. Directed by O'Bannon and written by Brent Friedman, based upon Lovecraft's 1927 novella The Case of Charles Dexter Ward, The Resurrected stars Jane Sibbett and Chris Sarandon as Claire and Charles Ward respectively. And yes, that is Jane Sibbett as in Carol from Friends, and if you thought Ross Geller was an unabashed psychopath, then Charles Dexter Ward has got something to say about that. You see, Claire Ward hires a private investigator, John March, played by the awesome John Terry, to investigate the increasingly bizarre actions of her husband Charles. And while if you're familiar with the events of Lovecraft's story, then you'll know it makes for a pretty sublime descent into macabre horror madness. I'll say no more, this movie is a worthy adaptation. It paints a perfect portrait. By no means is it perfect, but it's certainly worth a look. Swinging in at number 4, The Hole, 2001.
No, Mike, listen.
Please stop torturing yourself, okay? Please. It's not important anymore, okay? It's not your fault.
I have to tell you something.
You know what? I was pretty damn adventurous as a kid, but then I saw The Hole and I thought twice about poking my head around abandoned underground bunkers. I'm just kidding. You can't keep a good spelunker down, but still, this movie is certainly food for thought when it comes to making consequential decisions as a young adult. It's also absolutely crazy that this movie was made nearly 20 years ago. That's 2 decades. But also, it's quite enlightening to know that 2001's The Hole was certainly a demonstration of capturing a time and a place, and I think that's exactly why this movie is so appealing in hindsight. This movie is so 90s/early 2000s that it hurts, and it exemplifies a period of British horror where the new millennium had made way for a much more transatlantic kind of horror. And that's not necessarily a bad thing at all, but please know that this movie is dripping with more angst than a Hawthorne Heights record that just made pen pals with a bootleg Dirt and Grey poster on a live journal thread. Yeah, exactly. Directed by Nick Ham and written by Ben Court and Caroline Ip, the whole is based upon the 1991 psychological horror by Guy Burr. It tells the tale of four well-off preparatory students, Liz, Frankie, Mike and Jeff, who after spending a weekend partying in an underground bunker, as you do, find themselves locked inside with no way out. And oh yeah, did I mention that it stars the awesome Thora Birch and Keira Knightley respectively, who throughout this movie are both absolutely brilliant alongside Desmond Harrington and Lawrence Fox as the two convincingly decadent male blackguards Mike and Jeff. This movie is awesome and it's reminiscent of some of the more shocking psychological thrillers that flew under the radar during the mid to late 90s, but more importantly it made that style palatable for an emerging horror audience. Really, if this movie flew past you, I'd certainly give it a second look. Yeah, the plot is a little obvious, but it's not about that, it's about performance. And again, Thora Birch is remarkable in this movie. Also, it has a supporting role by Embeth Davids, aka Miss Honey from Matilda, and all is good in the world, so give it a watch just for that, really. Next up at number 3, The People Under the Stairs, 1991.
Children misbehaving in the basement, and one in the wall, doing his business, God knows where.
And talking of performance, wowza, I'm not sure if I'll ever forget the terrifying sound of Mrs. Robeson screaming at Alice to get in the bathtub, but truth be told, we have covered this movie before, quite a while ago in fact. But considering it's our 10th episode, I think it's proper that we pull it back out of the vaults or the strange crawl space between the walls and give praise to one of Wes Craven's strangest and most overlooked of horror movies. You see, riding off the success of Nightmare on Elm Street, I'm not entirely sure whether people knew what to expect from this movie following its release 7 years later. I mean, between that you had 1988's The Serpent and the Rainbow and 1989's Shocker, so stylistically I'm sure audiences were expecting an amalgamation of the three. You see, it's not that at all. The People Under the Stairs was a flat-out curveball from Wes Craven, and this movie is so unashamedly weird that several of the taboo themes that it handles could have gone the complete other way with audiences. But you know what? They didn't. Strangely enough, at the time this movie was a surprise commercial success, and I think in that sense it affirms exactly why these forgotten movies are so important for us to rediscover now. Yes, granted, The People Under the Stairs is perhaps one of our more recognisable forgotten horror movies, and in that sense, please don't begrudge me if you've heard of it, you're not the only one. But hey, it's episode 10, and I'm trying to make a point here. Horror cinema has so many of these gems that deserve a second look in, and for new emerging audiences of horror, there is a lot to be learned in The People Under the Stairs. Surprisingly enough, this movie is a weird satire of late-stage capitalism, and as far as characterization goes, it proves the point that with two weird enough villains and two awesome actors to deliver it, you can make even the most nonsensical of plots turn into a worthy horror show. Really, Brandon Adams, Everett McGill, and AJ Langer are awesome in this movie, but Wendy Roby as Mrs. Robeson steals the show. If you haven't had the pleasure of watching this movie quite yet, give it a look. Coming in at number 2, Ghost Story, 1981.
We can feel things watching us, and following us, and we dismiss them as fantasies.
Tell me guys, how is it that a worthy cinematic adaptation of one of the greatest works of horror fiction from the 20th century manages to find itself falling down the back of the dusty old shelf without a second look in? Beats me. But you know what's worse? This film has got 37% on Rotten Tomatoes. How? I do not know, and yet whilst this movie is far from being perfect, I think it's down to us individuals to be the judge of Ghost Story's true horror merits. For those of you that are already aware of Peter Straub's colossal horror novel of the same name, you'll know that it's one of the finest demonstrations of how to spin a classic ghostly tale, and whilst that particular horror trope is often overworked and underpaid, if you're looking for a familiar ghost story of the cinematic variety, then this movie is exactly that. I'm still scratching my head as to how this film became so poorly received, and yes, I do understand the criticisms of it, and I don't think that they're too far from being wrong. Ghost Story is indeed slow, it is drawn out, it irks on being rambling at points, but my word, if this film isn't a demonstration of creeping dread in a candlelit room flickering with the shadows of a haunted past, I'm not sure what else would suffice. And also, this movie is a different kind of forgotten cautionary tale that could certainly use a look in this day and age. Oh, also, did I mention that this movie stars frickin' Fred Astaire? Yeah. Exactly. Directed by John Irvin and written by Lawrence D. Cohen, Ghost Story is set during the frigid winter of 1979 in the small New England town of Milburn, where four elderly friends, the businessman Ricky Hawthorne, the lawyer Sears James, Dr. John Jaffrey, and the mayor Edward Charles Wanderley, convene for their weekly gathering. They are members of the Chowder Society, an informal men's club that gets together each week to tell tales of horror whilst they sip cognac for the sheer joy of it. I'll say no more because this film needs its slow creep of a narrative to get going, but as I said, this movie is all about performance. Fred Astaire, Melvin Douglas, Douglas Fairbanks Jr. and John Houseman undoubtedly carry this film as the hallmarks of cinema that they are, and Alice Krige is also remarkable in this movie, but part and parcel of Ghost Story depends on which way you view the resolution of its closing scenes. There is a real sense of something remarkable in this film that I can't quite place, but it's worth finding that out for yourself. You see, it was said that during the filming for Ghost Story, Fred Astaire felt that he was going to die or be murdered, so much so that he considered dropping out of the production. Ghost stories, they really can get to you. And finally, coming in at number 1 spot, Symptoms, 1974.
Did you hear that? What? There it is again.
And for the number 1 entry of part 10 of this forgotten horror movie series, we have to highlight the literal definition of a forgotten horror movie. Really, following its completion and subsequent premiere at the 1974 Cannes Film Festival as the first ever official British entry, Symptoms pretty much disappeared several years later. You see, the original prints of this movie were missing for over 3 decades, with the last ever showing of this movie being on the BBC back in 1983. After that, poof, gone. Disappeared with no clue as to why, when, or who had them. For many years, bootlegs of Symptoms were circulated privately by collectors, but between 1983 and up until recently, this movie was effectively forgotten from the halls of horror cinema. And then, in February of 2016, the British Film Institute saved the day, and now, as well as being available on DVD for your own collection, is also available on YouTube right this minute. So please guys, check it out. Because Symptoms is a remarkable entry in horror cinema, and it stars one of the most underrated female actors in 1970s British horror, Angela Pleasance, who is indeed the daughter of Donald Pleasance, Dr. Samuel Loomis himself. Written and directed by exploitation horror aficionado Jose Larraz, Symptoms tells the tale of the reclusive Helen Ramsey, who invites her friend Anne to stay with her for the weekend at her family's estate. And by estate, I mean absolutely huge English manor covered by a dense impenetrable forest that hasn't seen a glimpse of the outside world for the past few centuries. Warning signs already, right? You see, Helen has been away for years, working as a translator abroad before returning to her family's native England, where she had spent her childhood alongside Anne before leaving. The point is, there may well be reason for that, and soon we realise that Helen is full of far more inconsistencies of a much more terrifying kind of manner. I'll say no more because in classic British exploitation horror kind of fashion, this movie relies on its twisting and turning narrative to keep us on our toes, but most importantly, visually speaking, this movie is the definition of visual dread. This movie is just creepy to watch. It fills you with a weird sense of dread, its lingering camera is unnerving, and the performances from both Angela Pleasance and Lorna Hellebrand are terrifyingly brilliant, with Peter Vaughan, who plays Brady, also being of note. You see, as far as forgotten horror cinema is concerned, Symptoms is perhaps the closest that we'll ever come to defining the term, and that's why it takes our number 1 spot for part 10 of this series. Look how far we've come.
Number 5, you're next. Hey, family dinners are always a bit awkward, aren't they? You know, trying to get the gravy passed to you, trying to avoid an argument with your uncle about your career, and trying to elude the vicious sickos that are hunting you and your family for sport. You're Next is a 2011 slasher directed by Adam Wingard, who also blessed us with Godzilla vs. Kong, one of the finest films ever made. Made on a humble $1 million budget, You're Next is a horror movie that brings it to the absolute basics. One house, one troubled family, and 3 very dangerous psychopaths. An estranged family is meeting for a reunion at their summer home in the rural Deep South, and newcomer to the family, Erin, is nervous to be introduced officially as her boyfriend's long-term partner. Now, tensions are high enough with the usual family drama before the first crossbow bolt pierces the window, as the family is being hunted by a relentless pack of bloodthirsty animal mask-wearing lunatics who seem to be doing this whole thing just for kicks. Watch the family fall apart under pressure, metaphorically and uncomfortably literally, as they're picked off one by one by their sick predators, until one of them starts to rise up unexpectedly against their tormentors. Now, if you were a fan of the Hotline Miami games, this is probably as close as you're ever going to get to a movie for that 80s splatter feel and all the animal mask wearing lunatics. You're Next feels like a movie that got time traveled from 1984 in the best way. It's a throwback to the golden age of B-horror movies. Wet, gross, stupid, and in the darkest ways, really funny. This movie's almost a dysfunctional family comedy, if you can call it that. It's sinister, sick, gruesome, and hilarious, has an absolutely great sense of style, really cool soundtrack, and I guarantee you the main song from the movie is gonna get stuck in your head for weeks afterwards. Definitely check Your Next out if you're looking for some fluffy horror fun. I've got a DVD at home if you want to borrow it. Now hey ghouls and goblins, you already know that the best place for the scary video- Hey ghouls and goblins, you already know the best place for scary videos on the web is right here, but if somehow you didn't know that, always a good time to learn, so why don't you subscribe so you never miss a scare. Number 4. The Color Out of Space. When we think H.P. Lovecraft, we tend to think of giant squid monsters and incomprehensible madness. Well, this movie's got one of those in folds, and it's not the squid monster. The Color Out of Space is a 2019 horror movie directed by Richard Stanley, adapting the H.P. Lovecraft story of the exact same name, but modernizing it slightly, bringing it up to the 21st century. The story details a father moving his family to his late father's farm, escaping the bright lights and humdrum of city life, moving to his hometown of Arkham, the exceedingly cursed city from Lovecraft's writings. What should be a breath of fresh air and lovely times in the cottage turns to a nightmare when an asteroid falls to the farm, releasing with it a mysterious color that seeps into the farmland. A color out of space, if you will. It affects the minds of everyone around the farm, all the animals, and begins to seep into the water and drive everyone to incomprehensible madness. Nick Cage plays the patriarch of the Gardner family, and let me tell you, there could not possibly have been a better actor for the lead in a movie about slowly going mad. I mean, Nick Cage on his absolute best day already seems like he's about 2 screws short of absolute madness, so watching him in this is a treat. You spend the entire time wondering if the insanity is taking him over and consuming his brain, or if that's just how Nicolas Cage talks and he thinks he's doing a New England accent right now. Color Out of Space builds really slowly, leaving you on edge the entire time, and when the madness sets in, it sets in hard as you painfully watch the farmstead fall, desperate that maybe, just maybe, someone will pull through against the immeasurable horror of some entity beyond the cosmos. It captures Lovecraft's writing effortlessly and brings it to the modern age flawlessly, with all the blood and insanity you could hope for. Number 3. The Void. Our next entry on this list is The Void, a 2016 horror flick by Steven Kostanski, another Lovecraft horror movie. Your host has a little bit of a bias, and this one's Canadian made, so I have to include it based on that alone. It also totally rocks, so there is that. The Void is another flick that feels like it time traveled through the mid-80s, and maybe it's just my personal tastes, but that is very much a good thing. The Void seems like the kind of thing John Carpenter would have slapped his name on. A small-town deputy has his night wildly disturbed when he finds someone suffering from violent injuries, and after taking him to the local hospital, finds himself trapped in the hospital with his ex-wife, a nurse, who's dealing with a crisis of her own, as the hospital is being overrun by an onslaught of mysterious injuries and madness. The two estranged lovers find themselves caught in a blood-soaked conflict between a sinister cult and some entity that appears able to revive the dead, albeit a bit twisted into horrifying monstrosities of flesh and bone. Now if you're like me and you think The Thing is the greatest horror movie ever made, The Void feels like it could be its unofficial sequel. It's better than the actual sequel prequel to The Thing that they made. The special effects on the monsters are fantastic. If you're the kind of ghoul who loves puppets, prosthetics, and gallons worth of corn syrup blood, The Void has everything you are looking for in those 3 spades. And the plot is fun, and it has some good twists and turns, but let's be honest here. You're watching this one because it's got very gross monsters and really cool Lovecraft-inspired mythos of cults and a great god beyond the stars. You want my advice? Grab a friend or two, order the largest, greasiest pizza your local favorite spot has, grab a 2-liter of something carbonated, and have a great Friday night with this one. The Void to me is what a good horror movie should be. Gross, scary, a little stupid, and a ton of fun. Number 2, Hush. Okay, enough movies about incomprehensible horrors from beyond the stars. Let's reel it in a bit, and let's get back to some comprehensible horror. Home invasion. Lock those doors. Oh, sorry, I forgot to turn the volume up. Hush is a 2016 slasher home invasion movie coming to us from Blumhouse horror icon Mike Flanagan, director of a ton of amazing horror projects like Oculus, Dr. Sleep, Midnight Mass, The Haunting of shows, and Hush is no exception to that rule. A deaf and mute horror writer, that's why I did that before, who lives alone with her cat in the woods with a few isolated neighbors around her, becomes the unwilling target in the most dangerous game when a twisted hunter decides to make her his prey. After hunting her neighbor with a crossbow, he sets his sight on on her next. When he learns that his next victim is deaf and mute, it seems like he finds himself thrilled at the possibility of a challenge. Now, Hush could have very easily just been your run-of-the-mill slasher home invasion movie, but it stands a lot taller than that with some incredibly fantastic sound design. I mean, I would hope so, given the premise of the movie and the name of the movie. The movie is so tense and saves its sounds really effectively for when it knows it's going to be the scariest. Makes it a lot scarier than the usual horror movies with a bombastic booming soundtrack and tons of scare hordes. It lets you really breathe in the tension. The cat and mouse game between the protagonist Maddie and the unnamed hunter feels deeply personal, putting you smack dab in the middle of it, chewing your fingernails the entire time as you hope for the best. Please check out Hush. Now, number 1, Green Room. Coming in at our number 1 spot is one of my favorite horror thrillers of all time, Green Room. An A24 horror classic before that was even a cool thing to describe your movie as. A failing Midwestern punk band are trying to hit it big while traveling the Northwest, barely scraping by on instant ramen and van life when they agree to play a gig at a rural roadhouse. Absolutely thrilled at the prospect of getting paid for once, the band takes the gig without asking any questions, only to swiftly discover upon arriving that they are in bad company. The bar is ran and owned by a skinhead gang who don't take kindly to them whatsoever. After the bassist witnesses a crime in the eponymous Green Room, the band is trapped by the gang who refuses to let them leave. Alive. From here, the movie turns into a sort of reverse home invasion as the band tries desperately to escape the clutches of the gang by any means necessary. Green Room is tense. You are going to feel like you are trapped in there with them. If you've ever survived a local DIY show basement, then the sights of Green Room will look pretty familiar to you. Setting a high-octane horror movie in such a hostile environment that you'll recognize makes it feel all the more real. You know, I've seen countless horror movies in haunted houses, but I can't name that many in a bar basement. Green Room is horror at some of its best, taking a concept I guarantee you haven't seen before and exploring it beyond just a simple bloody slasher. Fantastic camera work, dark humor, and a gripping plot with lovable characters and truly hateable villains. We are 3 paragraphs into me talking about this, and I haven't even dropped the biggest bomb, which is that the leader of the skinhead gang is played by Sir Patrick Stewart in one of his most unhinged roles ever since maybe American Dad. I'd say he steals this thing, but honestly everybody delivers. Anton Yelchin also delivers one of the best performances of his career as the band's weary, tortured bassist. Go into Green Room expecting a super tense, shockingly gory, but amazing horror movie if you can brave it. Just make sure you get a stamp on your wrist so you can leave.
Coming in at number 5, we've got Piranha from 1995. The Piranha most people are familiar with these days is probably the 2010 3D schlockfest erected by Alexander Aja. Boasting a cast containing Adam Scott, Jerry O'Connell, Christopher Lloyd, Ving Rhames, and more, there was plenty of name recognition to be had. The insane amount of fun made it easy to remember too. But before there was Piranha 3D, there was plain old regular Piranha, made for TV. A remake of the 1978 classic put together by Joe Dante. That's right, Piranha 1995, and boy does this one get lost in the mix. When it comes to claims to fame, this version of the Killer Fish movie has very little. Mila Kunis is in it. That's right, in her debut role too, at age 12 as the daughter of intrepid homeowner Paul Grogan. Beyond that, I'm really not sure what there is to say about this version of Piranha. The screenplay is almost identical to the original with very little room to update for a modern audience. In fact, even the special effects were recycled from the 1978 version. That is some next level remake streamlining, eh? Most folks agree that although the two films are technically the same, all the humor seems to have been sapped from the 1995 version, making it much more of a slog to sit through. This probably has something to do with the fact that nobody remembers this movie. I suppose when you're on a made-for-TV budget trying to breathe some life into a 20-year-old movie, you're gonna have to make some concessions. At least they got it done, right? Really and truly, you're better off watching any of the other Piranha movies, even 3DD. That's right, this movie somehow manages to be less entertaining than 3DD. So unless you're a Mila Kunis completionist, and I'm sure some of you are, you should probably leave this remake in the forgotten pile, just to be safe. Coming in at number 4, we've got Black Christmas from 2006. Funnily enough, with all the Christmas decorations that pop up on November 1st, I was discussing Black Christmas with some friends the other day. Of course, the Bob Clark original is a bona fide classic and should be watched every December. But then I brought up the possibility of a Black Christmas marathon, 1974, 2006, and 2019, just for fun. To my surprise, the folks I was talking to didn't even know there was a 2006 remake, and really, this shouldn't have surprised me. It's a fascinating little case study. Plenty of actors who went on to be big in their own right, a trailer with a bunch of kills filmed without the director's knowledge, some additional backstory for the killer. It's a strange recipe, kinda like human flesh sugar cookies. But mostly, it works. This is by no means a bad movie, but it exists in a space where it's less good than the original and also has a more modern remake garnering a lot of attention. Plus, the mid-2000s were kind of rough when it came to horror. A lot of folks were paying attention to parodies and French extremist flicks, and that's about it. So when a remake of one of the most legendary slashers of all time popped up, it seemed to sort of just exist. But if you're looking for a Christmas movie that really dials up the festive fear, this is the one for you. I already mentioned the flesh cookies, so let's list off a few more holiday horrors you'll get to see while watching 2006's Black Christmas. We've got a wicked snowstorm leading to death by falling icicle. We've got the world's sharpest Christmas tree, and of course there are plenty of Christmas tunes to really set the mood. Plus, if you were just expecting Billy to make a return, think again. As the weather gets a little colder, consider dusting off this forgotten remake and take it for a spin. Before we get to number 3, if you guys are enjoying this video, make sure to give this video a big thumbs up. It really helps with the algorithm. Thank you. Coming in number 3, we've got April Fool's Day from 2008. See, if they were gonna make a remake of an April Fool's themed horror movie, why not resurrect Slaughter High? Too little too late, I suppose. Although everything will be remade eventually, because how else are studios gonna hold on to the rights of everything until the end of time? But I digress. This version of April Fool's Day is based on the 1986 flick of the same name. However, unlike the original, this one was destined for the small screen. Not even made for TV like Piranha. AFD 2008 was straight to video. You know what that means. Very few redeeming features. They tried to make something that star Scout Taylor Compton describes as Mean Girls crossed with horror, and those are lofty aspirations. Although if someone did it right, it could be a lot of fun. It's too bad they couldn't capitalize on that idea in 2008. It ended up feeling a lot more like an I Know What You Did Last Summer ripoff than an April Fool's one. And the comedy we were promised, well, it wasn't very funny, even in 2008. And the bar was not set very high at that point. It's not too surprising that this one went right to the bargain bins and then straight out of our collective memory. Maybe it's worth picking up on April Fool's Day, but don't expect to do much other than crack jokes. Coming in number 2, we've got The Wizard of Gore from 2007. Who would have thought remaking Herschel Gordon Lewis films would one day be trendy? I suppose stranger things have happened. I'm sort of surprised that this one doesn't get talked about more, but what can you do? Maybe remakes of cult splatter oddities from the 60s and 70s just don't have the mass appeal you'd think they would. Even with Crispin Glover as Montag, it sort of misses the mark. Lots of fun though, with plenty of ooey gooey gore. The premise, for those unfamiliar with Montag the Magnificent, is that there is a traveling show featuring a mysterious magician. He brings beautiful women onto the stage and proceeds to eviscerate them in front of the audience. It's disturbing and all too real, but at the end of each show, the bloodied person is revealed to be actually fine. But then every volunteer ends up dead. Their death happens sometime after the end of the performance, but it always has something to do with the way they died on stage. Uh-oh. The movie doesn't follow Montag though. It focuses mostly on Edmund Bigelow, a weird journalist turned noir protagonist who finds it a little strange that Montag can perform live surgery. He starts digging and finds some stuff he can't explain. But is he going insane? Is the Wizard of Gore really murdering people? Can he carry this movie on his own? Satisfying answers to any of these questions are hard to find, which might have something to do with the forgettability. But isn't it wild that there's an HGL remake from the last 2 decades? Apparently somebody remade Blood Feast in 2016 too. Who knew? And coming in number 1, we've got The Uninvited from 2009. This one might not read as a remake at first. And it's not a remake of the 1944 supernatural horror. It's actually a remake of the 2003 South Korean film A Tale of Two Sisters, which is an adaptation of a Korean folktale. Lots to look at here. But back to The Uninvited, this is a pretty decent little adaptation. There have definitely been worse American remakes of Asian movies. Much worse. So why was this one sort of forgotten? Well, I think the different titles had something to do with it, and the fact that it was a remake of a relatively recent movie at the time from another country. That could have had something to do with its little renown. And of course, why watch a remake like this when you can watch the original? But hey, Elizabeth Banks and Emily Browning serve up some quality performances, and the twist is changed up enough that you can still get some enjoyment going in knowing that the two sisters aren't exactly what they seem. The Uninvited manages to eke out a little ground for itself and finds a semi-unique identity in doing so. So it might not have turned too many heads at the time of release, but it still holds up as a decent little horror flick, remake or not. Crashing to Earth at number 5, we've got Night of the Comet. If you enjoy Buffy the Vampire Slayer, then you have Night of the Comet to thank. Apparently it was a big influence on the creation of the titular character. Wicked. Night of the Comet is a Valley Girl goofball comedy complete with space dust zombie invasion. It kicks off as Earth passes through the tail of a comet with unforeseen circumstances. See, it's implied that this is the same comet that killed the dinosaurs, and people have decided to celebrate like it's the 4th of July. The morning after, anybody who wasn't safely contained in a steel box of some sort has become a sort of dust zombie. I wouldn't worry about that too much. Two sisters who were very much inside steel containers for reasons that are better seen than explained survive the initial transformation and decide to see what the world has to offer now that everyone's essentially dead. They meet a lovely truck driver and the trio begins their post-apocalyptic lives together. But surviving zombies isn't enough. No. To make this a true sci-fi horror, we're also introduced to some mad scientists. Strictly speaking, they're looking for a cure to this space disease, but they actually end up draining healthy people of all their blood and then leaving them to die. It's in the name of research. Science. Yeesh. Night of the Comet is a classic cheesy B-movie romp. It's packed to the brim with cliches and nonsense situations, but it's done with love and a sense of levity. You get a shopping mall montage a la Dawn of the Dead, but this time it's more actually shopping than survival. We've got a smattering of callbacks to classics through clever and on-the-nose addition of a movie theater set piece. And we get, as previously mentioned, a lovely mad scientist or two. It's just a lot of fun, okay? Coming in at number 4, we've got Virus. Hey man, the trendy thing to do right now is to watch virus movies, right? See what writers and directors predicted correctly and what they got wrong, maybe see that happy ending at the other end of the tunnel. Personally, I prefer to watch movies that don't make me think of a virus at all, but hey, different strokes for different folks. This post-apocalyptic Japanese sci-fi flick was the most expensive Japanese film ever made upon release. It was a Japan-America co-production, and for whatever reason, the Western release got about 40 minutes snipped, so look for the original if you can. Beautiful, poignant, and often heart-wrenching, it's not as goofy as some might make it out to be. After a mimic virus is accidentally released by Americans trying to prevent just that, it quickly spreads through Italy. Whatever virus this one attaches to gets amplified, and scientists quickly realize that that means the end for humanity. Starting as an outbreak movie, it transitions seamlessly into a disaster flick and a political thriller. World leaders do their best to prevent the spread as it becomes apparent that soon the global population will plummet. Eventually, most of the world has died off, and survivors from submarines and Arctic bases come together to repopulate the planet. Seems like a great solution until earthquakes threaten to set off nuclear warheads. Just one disaster after another, huh? I mean, if we can't look at that situation and say, thank goodness it's not us, then what can we do? Huge in its scope, Virus is tragic and beautiful. There are plenty of gory and corpse-filled scenes for all the hardcore folks out there too. Rolling in at number 3, we've got Splinter. Did somebody say low-budget fungus infection movie? No? Well, I mean, that makes sense. Why would somebody just say that at random? Well, now that we're on the topic, we might as well address it though. Splinter is a tense, enjoyable B-movie that doesn't get nearly enough attention. It kicks off with a couple of folks getting kidnapped by some drug-fueled rednecks, and after stopping at a gas station in the middle of nowhere, which is always a bad move, they realize that something is amiss. And by something, I mean an infectious splinter monster, and by amiss, I mean killing and devouring everyone it comes into contact with. It infects people by poking into their skin with its sharp pointy bits and working by sort of zombie rules. If it breaks skin or enters you in some other way, you're probably gonna turn. To add to this already difficult situation, dismembered infected parts can move around autonomously, and they are heat-seeking too. And the Splinter things look pretty cool. Low budget ain't such a big deal when it's done as well as this. Splinter is a largely well-written and acted movie too. You'd expect a group of survivors in a situation like this to act as useless cannon fodder, but they're actually all useful and likable in their own special ways. They overcome personality flaws and maximize their strengths in the name of survival. Big ups to the folks behind these choices. Sure, the camera can get a little too shaky sometimes, but it does a very good job of selling and maybe hiding some of the other low-budget restrictions. Where did they come from? Where did they go? Why are these splinters causing blood to flow? Coming in at number 2, we've got Altered States. This is a drug-fueled existential trip that brings a man to the origin of all life. Based on the novel by Paddy Chayefsky, Altered State takes a look at a psychopathologist who wants insight into the mind. Sensory deprivation tanks, psychedelics, the whole 9 yards. His marriage is failing, so what better time to head out to Mexico to give ayahuasca a try. After taking the journey, Edward brings some tincture home and keeps experimenting. By using some inside of a sensory deprivation tank, he's able to experience more intense visions, and these visions soon become physical reality. He actually literally becomes earlier versions of man, which naturally leads to caveman rampages through the city. This freaks out his colleagues, wife, pedestrians, you name it. But he keeps going. Again, in the name of science. Now, I don't want to spoil too much, so I'll pose a question instead. Given the ability to regress into literally nothing, would you let your consciousness rejoin the universe, or would you fight it and come back to reality knowing that there's more out there? altered states is constantly wrestling with the origin of life by way of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Our scientist protagonist knows better, but he keeps coming back to the titular altered states in order to experience the rush again. It's a fascinating exercise in pseudoscience with surprisingly crazy special effects. If you've ever wanted to see William Hurt run around as a deranged beige caveman, here's your opportunity. And at number 1, we've got The Hidden. Full disclosure, this flick did get a sequel. I know, how could I possibly say The Hidden is forgotten if 2 of them exist? Well, even with a cult following, I can't say too many people bring this one up these days, which is a travesty, but hopefully some more views will come after we discuss it. It's a frickin' slug alien intergalactic buddy cop movie. What's not to love? Somehow, a malicious extraterrestrial body snatcher has made it to Earth and wants to cause a whole lot of trouble. For an alien, it's got expensive taste and decides to rob a bank, snag a Ferrari, spend time at a strip club, and more. After infecting a few civilians via mouth transfer, the local police get involved. Obviously, they're in over their heads, so the FBI sends some dudes too. But our main dude, the ever excellent Dale Cooper, well, he doesn't seem totally human. And human he is not. Teaming up with the people police, our alien law enforcer begins a quest to track down the luxuriously living larva from outer space. Although it sounds sort of silly when I put it that way, The Hidden is actually able to hit all sorts of marks. We get sci-fi thriller moments, action-packed sequences, and of course plenty of dark humor. It even presents us with a plot to invade the government, which results in a presidential candidate firefight right in front of the press. Imagine what would happen if we saw something like that in real life.
Kicking off at number 5, The Awakening, 2011. Honestly, I'd actually forgotten about this movie before doing my due diligence for this list, but my word is this film good. And whilst it certainly seems that this one flew under the radar following its initial success, it also seems that 2011 as a whole was a pretty undiscovered year for horror cinema, and you'll find out later on this list, but shh, because that would be telling. You see, The Awakening is no exception, and yet as far as slow-burning, classic gothic horrors of a British disposition go, I'm fairly confident that 2011's The Awakening has been often overlooked. Written and directed by Nick Murphy with an additional screenplay by Stephen Volk, the writer responsible for 1992's Ghostwatch, The Awakening's strength is within its utterly convincing and devastatingly bleak supernatural storyline. Set in 1921 in the bleak midwinter of post-war Britain, it tells a tale of a woman named Florence Cathcart, played by Rebecca Hall, a published author who works alongside the police in order to debunk the supernatural in an effort to expose the many charlatans who would conduct seances for profit to connect widows with their husbands lost in France. Florence herself has lost her lover, and her pursuit of perhaps one day seeing him again is what spurs her on to hunt the spirits of the dead. Well, that's before a man named Robert, played by the fantastic Dominic West, a teacher from a famed boarding school in the Cumbrian countryside, then contacts Florence after a string of ghostly sightings following the recent death of a student. And I'll say no more, because whilst the pieces are very firmly set in place with this movie, a classic ghost story would be nothing without the journey. Honestly, this film is just great, and whilst perhaps a little slow, there is so much to be enjoyed here, particularly with the sound design. Also, Dominic West is remarkable. After all, how could he not be? He's Jimmy McNulty. Swinging in at number 4, Creep, 2004. And if you've seen any of our British horror lists, then you'll know the particular reverence that I have for this movie. For those that haven't though, essentially if you were a teenager growing up in the midst of the 2000s, more often than not you'll be familiar with this movie, because 2004's Creep did the rounds like a viral video of Postman Pat on a Nokia N-Gage. Alright, enough nostalgia, because this film is messed up and also terrifying. So let's see what all the fuss is about. Written and directed by Christopher Smith, the man who would go on to create 2006's Severance, as well as 2009's Triangle, Smith's credentials will perhaps give you some sort of idea as to the stylistic choices involved in Creep. Essentially, a simple premise with lots of gore, and yet a surprising amount of depth and ingenuity within the actual components of the film. Creep tells a tale of Kate, played by Frank Potente, a young German woman who, after spending an evening at a party in downtown London, hops on the tube at Charing Cross Station station with the intention of meeting back up with a friend. However, that plan soon goes awry after she falls asleep on the platform, and when she wakes up, finds that the tube has been closed and locked up for the night. I mean, that's a terrifying thought in and of itself, but hey, listen, unfortunately for Kate, that is the least of her worries because there are other horrors that lurk beneath. I mean, okay, we'll leave the exposition there, but I feel that this film in many ways got unfairly tarnished with the brush of too much gore. Yes, there are some horrifying scenes in this movie, but yes, all of them are earned because the origin of the creep in question is, well, I'll let you find out for yourself because after all, that's the point of horror, right? It is messed up though. Next up at number 3, Absentia, 2011. Whoo! Boy, is this film spooky. But first and more importantly, sometimes when a filmmaker makes noteworthy waves in horror cinema, it's incredibly easy to overlook their earlier works, which is mainly why this particular entry winds up on our list. Well, the filmmaker in question is of course Mike Flanagan, and really if you're a fan of his work regardless, please watch this movie because you will gain an understanding of just exactly what Flanagan intends with horror as a genre. If you watched The Haunting of Hill House and appreciated how the paranormal could be interpreted as both supernatural means as well as the logical and the physical, then you will thoroughly enjoy Absentia because I'm fairly confident this film laid the seed for his more complete works. Because this was Flanagan's first big break, an independent film crowdfunded and produced partially through Fallback Plan Productions, an independent production company by Justin Gordon and Morgan Peter Brown. And thankfully for us, Flanagan got given the chance to deliver his horror vision in feature length. Written and directed by Mike Flanagan, Absentia tells a tale of Trisha, played by Courtney Bell, a pregnant woman who lives alone, who for the past 7 years has been struggling to accept the disappearance of her missing husband, Daniel. As she prepares to declare him dead in Absentia, her sister Callie, played by Katie Parker, comes to stay in an effort to help deal with the stress of arranging a death certificate and help her through the process. Strangely though, as the date approaches, Trisha begins experiencing terrifying nightmares and bizarre hallucinations of her husband, seeing his image just out of the corner of her eye down a darkened hallway. Seeking therapy, her psychiatrist tells her it's a mixture of stress and guilt and to continue on with the process. But obviously, we know different, right? But no spoilers because really this film is a worthy experience. Genuinely, this is one of the most terrifying films on any of these lists. Yeah, it may suffer a little for its lack of a budget, but hey, all we need is a horror story, and this is the definition of that. Coming in at number 2, Lemora, A Child's Tale of the Supernatural, 1973.
I was as beautiful as you once, not now. There was an old woman, all skin and bone.
Because when we're talking about a lack of a budget, this one is also no exception to that rule. And yet, despite that, all it takes is a well-crafted narrative, a few unnerving moments, and you have all the key components for a classic of cult horror. Now, I know that quite a few of you Top 5 Scary fans have been calling for this particular entry to be included on these lists, and I'm happy to place it neatly near the top of the pile, because in many ways, this is exactly what we mean by forgotten horror movies. Written and directed by Richard Blackburn, Lemora was initially cast off as a cheap imitation of the many successes of Hammer horror as well as 1970s Count Yorga vampire, but as many fans of vampire classic cinema will dutifully inform you, the only 1970s vampire movie to ever take that particular blood-based cake is this movie. It tells a tale of a young girl named Leela Lee, played by the late B-movie starling Cheryl Smith, who during the Prohibition era of the 1930s is summoned by a mysterious letter to visit her injured and estranged father, a notorious gangster of the bootlegging variety, before he dies. Since her early childhood and following her mother's murder at the hands of her father, Leela Lee was instead raised by the Reverend, played by Richard Blackburn himself, where she became a noted choir singer at his Baptist church. Despite his warnings, Leela Lee takes the bus to her father's alleged location, the strange town of Astaroth, where she stumbles upon a town divided of a particularly vampiric variety. Listen, we'll say no more, but whilst this film is very much of its era, it's also awesome, and the imagery evoked in this movie more often than not is remarkably unsettling. In many ways, this film highlights the ingenuity of a decade, a time where horror cinema could indeed capture the thrill of the form by sheer force of will alone. Yeah, admittedly, this film isn't for everyone, but deep beneath its kitschy surface, it is a beautifully chilling piece of work. And also, I'm pretty sure it's on YouTube, so just give it a watch. And finally, coming in at number 1 spot, The Frighteners, 1996.
Good food, huh?
Yes. Great.
Oh man, I love this movie, and 90s nostalgia aside, there is so much to be enjoyed in The Frighteners. Listen, so far in this list series, we haven't yet given the top spot to a horror comedy, and so consider this one the first of the pile. However, although this movie is very much intended to deliver more smiles than grimaces, that's not to say that there aren't some incredibly disturbing moments in this film, which is perhaps why it was sidelined at the time of its release. In that case though, hindsight is indeed our friend, because talking of friends, come on, who won't want Cyrus, Stuart and the Judge by your side if you were having a bad day, right? But hey, that's spoilers, so let's wind it back a bit. Written and directed by the legendary Peter Jackson with an additional screenplay credit for Fran Walsh, this is perhaps Jackson's most underappreciated pieces of cinema, although at the time critics did herald this movie for its critical ingenuity. Initially commissioned as a spin-off film for HBO's Tales from the Crypt, The Frighteners tells the tale of an architect named Frank Bannister, played by the fantastic Michael J. Fox in his final leading role in a feature-length film before retiring. Following the death of his wife and after descending into a mire of misery, Frank abandons his profession and then quickly discovers that he has the uncanny ability to see the dead. And what does he do with that newfound power? Well, he makes friends with the ghosts in question, of course, and then uses them in a money-making scheme where they con unassuming homeowners into believing their house is haunted. There's a lot more to this movie, but hey, that's pretty much the gist. But the visual effects in this movie are something else entirely, especially given the decade. Also, just the sheer horror tone of this movie is an experience in itself, and as is the case with the best of the best in horror comedy, The Frighteners knows exactly what it is: a fan of horror.